Welcome to the Crazy Alchemist podcast, where alchemy, occultism, and strange history come alive.
On the morning of February 17, 1600, in Rome's Campo dei Fiori, executioners stripped a man naked, tied him to a stake, and set him on fire. His name was Filippo Bruno, though he called himself Giordano. He was 52 years old. He had spent the last 7 years in a dungeon. Before they lit the fire, they drove an iron spike through his tongue or clamped it with metal. The sources disagree on the method, but agree on the purpose. He was not to speak. When someone held up a crucifix, he turned his face away. His ashes went into the Tiber. The popular version of this story is clean. A brave scientist said the earth moves, the church killed him for it. The actual story is stranger. Bruno was a scientist the way a hurricane is a weather event. He was that too, but the word does not begin to contain what he was. Bruno was born in January or February 1548 in Nola, a town near Naples with a long intellectual tradition. As a teenager, he entered the Dominican convent of San Domenico Maggiore in Naples, where Thomas Aquinas had once taught. Sources disagree on whether he arrived in 1563 or 1565. He took the name Giordano. He was brilliant and difficult from the start. He read everything he could find, including material the order did not approve of. He removed images of saints from his cell and kept only a crucifix. He was reported for reading Erasmus, whose works were on the index of forbidden books. He debated his teachers on the Trinity, on Aristotle, on the nature of Christ. By 1576, the order had opened formal heresy proceedings against him. He did not wait for the verdict. He shed his Dominican habit and ran. He was 28. He would spend the next 16 years running. The list of cities reads like a picaresque novel: Geneva, Toulouse, Paris, London, Oxford, Wittenberg, Helmstedt, Frankfurt, Prague, Zurich, Padua, Venice. Geneva first. He briefly joined the Calvinists. It lasted weeks. He published a broadsheet listing 20 errors in a single lecture by the philosophy professor Antoine de la Faye. They jailed him for slander. He apologized on his knees, was excommunicated anyway, and moved on. Paris next. He caught the attention of King Henry III, who was fascinated by Bruno's memory techniques. Henry gave him an extraordinary lectureship, a rare privilege for a foreigner. Bruno published his first book on memory, De Umbris Idearum, on the shadows of ideas, in 1582. For a few years he had stability. He used it to write. Came in 1583, he lived at the French embassy under the protection of Michel de Castelnau. He published 6 Italian dialogues in 2 years, including La Cena delle Ceneri, the Ash Wednesday Supper, and Del Infinito Universo e Mondi, on the infinite, the universe, and worlds. These were the books that contained his most radical cosmological ideas. He also went to Oxford. It went badly. Bruno gave a series of lectures defending Copernicus. George Abbot, who later became Archbishop of Canterbury, mocked him publicly. "The earth goes round and the heavens stand still," Abbot sneered. Whereas in truth it was his own head which rather did run round, and his brains did not stand still. Worse, Abbot caught Bruno using material from Marsilio Ficino without attribution. The historian Mordecai Feingold later suggested it was Bruno's personality more than his ideas that made Oxford hostile. He was arrogant. He lectured the English on their provincialism while a guest in their country. After Oxford, he retreated to the embassy. He made almost no friends in England. The ones he made were telling: John Florio, the lexicographer who later translated Montaigne; Alexander Dixon, a Scottish student of memory techniques, and the physician Matthew Gwynne, people interested in language and memory, not the Oxford establishment. He returned to Paris, then moved to German-speaking lands, Wittenberg, Helmstedt, Prague, where Emperor Rudolf II, the great patron of alchemists and astronomers, gave him 300 thalers, Frankfurt, where he published, and nearly settled. Then, in 1591, he went back to Italy. Bruno wrote more about memory than about cosmology. This fact tends to get lost in the popular narrative, which wants him to be a martyr for heliocentrism. He wrote at least 7 major works on the art of memory between 1582 and 1591. He understood his system as a magical operation. The word mnemonic does not begin to cover it. The classical art of memory, going back to the ancient Greeks, used a simple principle. Attach images to locations in a building you know well, walk through the building in your mind, and the images trigger recall. Roman orators used the technique to memorize hours-long speeches. It worked, and it was ordinary. Bruno took this and made it something else entirely. He combined the classical memory palace with Ramon Lull's combinatoric system, a set of rotating concentric wheels from the 13th century that could generate vast numbers of logical combinations. He added imagery from the Hermetic tradition, the body of texts attributed to the legendary sage Hermes Trismegistus. He borrowed structural diagrams from the Ars Notoria, a medieval grimoire that promised divine knowledge through contemplation of sacred figures. The result was a memory architecture of staggering complexity. His system used wheels with 30 positions each, building images up to 5 layers deep. The theoretical library this created contained over 24 million combinatoric entries. But the numbers were not the point. Bruno, following Hermetic philosophy, believed that anything possessing movement possessed soul, and anything with soul was connected to the soul of the cosmos. His memory images were not static labels pinned to mental furniture. They moved, they lived. By filling his mind with living images of all things, the practitioner could reproduce the structure of the universe itself inside his own consciousness. This was for Bruno the highest magic, not pulling coins from ears, not summoning spirits. The act of knowing everything, of containing the living world inside the mind, was itself a form of power over reality. Frances Yates, in her 1964 book Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition, argued that this is the key to understanding Bruno. He was a Hermetic magician first. His philosophical system happened to produce ideas that modern science later confirmed through entirely different methods. The idea most people associate with Bruno is the infinite universe. He was right about it. He arrived at it through methods no modern scientist would recognize. Copernicus, in 1543, moved the center of the cosmos from the Earth to the Sun. This was a major rearrangement, but Copernicus kept the celestial sphere, the outer shell of fixed stars that bounded the universe. His cosmos was bigger than Ptolemy's, but it still had an edge. Bruno removed the edge. In Del Infinito Universo e Mondi, published in 1584, he argued that the universe has no boundary and no center. The stars are not lights fixed to a sphere, they are suns, each with its own planets. Those planets might support life. The number of worlds is infinite. This was not an inference from data. Bruno had no telescope. He had no observational evidence for exoplanets. He arrived at infinity through a philosophical argument rooted in Hermetic and Neoplatonic ideas about the nature of God. An infinite God, Bruno reasoned, would produce an infinite creation. A finite universe would limit God's power and generosity, which was theologically unacceptable. The argument is philosophically interesting and scientifically worthless. It does not prove anything about the physical universe. And yet, when the James Webb Space Telescope photographs galaxies 13 billion light-years away, when astronomers catalog thousands of confirmed exoplanets, when cosmologists model a universe so large that the observable portion is a speck inside something unimaginably larger, Bruno's conclusion looks correct. His method was wrong. His answer was right. Or maybe the right way to say it is, we do not yet know enough to say whether his method was wrong. He started from a different set of assumptions than modern astrophysics, arrived at a compatible conclusion, and we cannot explain how, except to say it was a guess that happened to land. Unless the Hermetic intuition about the nature of infinity was tracking something real, that the later scientific tradition rediscovered by a different path. This is one of those places where honest writing means leaving the question open. After 16 years of wandering, Bruno went home. The invitation came from Giovanni Mocenigo, a Venetian nobleman who wanted to learn Bruno's memory system. Venice was the most liberal of the Italian states, tolerant of heretics and independent of Rome in ways other cities were not. Bruno may have been homesick. He had not heard Italian spoken as a native language in years. He may have believed Venice was safe. He arrived in late 1591 and moved into Mocenigo's palazzo in Campo San Samuele. The arrangement soured quickly. Mocenigo wanted practical magic, secrets he could use. Bruno taught him philosophy. Mocenigo wanted the trick. Bruno gave him the system. When Bruno announced he was leaving for Frankfurt to publish new work, Mocenigo locked him in a room and called the Inquisition. On May 23, 1592, Mocenigo filed a written denunciation. The charges: blasphemy, denial of the Trinity, belief in multiple worlds, and various accusations of personal misconduct. The Venetian Inquisition arrested Bruno. He defended himself with skill. He stressed the philosophical nature of his positions and admitted doubt on some points of doctrine. Venice might have treated him leniently, but Rome wanted him. In January 1593, he was transferred to the prisons of the Roman Inquisition. He would not leave for 7 years. The Roman trial is poorly documented. Key files were lost or destroyed. A summary of the proceedings, rediscovered in 1940, provides the skeleton of what happened, but large gaps remain. Bruno was interrogated repeatedly between 1593 and 1999. He wrote lengthy depositions defending his views. He distinguished between philosophical speculation and theological doctrine, a distinction the Inquisition did not accept. He offered to recant specific positions while maintaining his broader philosophical framework. In mid-January 1599, the Inquisition presented him with 8 specific charges and demanded full recantation. The exact content of these 8 charges has never been made public. From the summary and from the work of historians like Luigi Firpo, the charges appeared to have included denial of the Trinity, denial of Christ's divinity, denial of transubstantiation, denial of the virginity of Mary, denial of eternal damnation, belief in the transmigration of souls, and belief in the plurality of inhabited worlds. Bruno initially agreed to recant some of these positions. By September 1599, he had withdrawn his agreement. On February 8, 1600, the sentence was read. Bruno responded to his judges with what the court record describes as a threatening tone. His words survived because an eyewitness, the German scholar Gaspar Schaap, recorded them in a letter. Perchance you who pronounce this sentence against me are in greater fear than I who receive it. 9 days later, he was dead. Here is where the easy narratives fail. The most common telling of Bruno's death goes like this. A brave scientist stood up for the truth that the Earth orbits the sun, and the Church murdered him for it. Carl Sagan told a version of this in Cosmos. Neil deGrasse Tyson's reboot repeated it. The 2014 episode depicted Bruno as a visionary scientist persecuted by religious obscurantism. The problem is that in 1600, heliocentrism was not a heresy. The Catholic Church had no official position on the Copernican system. Copernicus's De Revolutionibus had been published in 1543 with a dedication to Pope Paul III and remained in circulation without censure until 1616, 16 years after Bruno's death. When the Church finally did condemn heliocentrism, it was in the context of Galileo's trial a generation later. Bruno's charges were theological. He denied core Catholic doctrines. This does not make the Church's actions less monstrous. They burned a man alive and gagged him with iron so he could not speak as he died. The distinction between killed for astronomy and killed for theology is a distinction in the category of the crime, not in its severity. But the martyr of science narrative erases what Bruno actually was. He was a Hermetic philosopher who believed his memory system could contain the cosmos. He was a reader of ancient Egyptian wisdom traditions who took Hermes Trismegistus as a genuine source of divine revelation. He built his cosmology on theological and magical foundations, not empirical ones. Calling him a scientist in the modern sense strips away everything that made him Bruno and replaces it with something more comfortable, a forerunner of our own worldview. The second story is the mirror image. In this version, Bruno was a reckless provocateur, a loudmouth who insulted everyone he met, the Oxford professors, the Calvinists in Geneva, the Dominicans. He denied every doctrine he encountered and talked himself into execution. Catholic apologists sometimes tell this story. It has a grain of truth in it. Bruno was difficult. He made enemies everywhere. He was not a gentle martyr waiting serenely for the flames. But this version erases the 7 years of dungeons, 7 years of interrogations, 7 years during which Bruno wrote lengthy, careful defenses of his philosophical positions. A pure provocateur would have recanted and walked free. Bruno came close to recanting. He could have done it. He chose not to. The question of why he refused is the question that matters, and neither story answers it.
Bruno's system was a unified vision in which everything connected to everything else. The infinite universe was connected to the Hermetic principle of divine plenitude. The art of memory was connected to the structure of the cosmos. The denial of the Trinity was connected to his understanding of God as the infinite one expressing itself through infinite worlds. To recant any piece was to unravel the whole fabric. He seems to have understood this. The Inquisition offered him partial recantation, give up these specific positions and keep the rest. He tried briefly in 1599, then he pulled back. Apparently, he realized that what they were asking him to dismantle was the architecture of his entire mind. Paracelsus burned textbooks and fled cities. Cagliostro performed and dazzled and eventually rotted in a papal prison. Bruno belongs to a different category. He was a man who had built a universe inside his own head and could not disassemble it without destroying himself. This is speculation. No one recorded his private reasoning. The trial documents that survive are institutional records, not personal testimony. But the pattern of his behavior, the oscillation between willingness to recant and final refusal, suggests a man negotiating with himself as much as with his judges. For nearly 3 centuries after his death, Bruno was mostly forgotten. The Rosicrucian and Hermetic traditions that continued through the 17th and 18th centuries rarely mentioned him by name. He was too dangerous to claim as a predecessor. That changed in the 19th century when Bruno became useful to a different cause. Italian unification brought the new secular state into conflict with the Vatican. Anti-clerical movements needed martyrs. Bruno was perfect, killed by the church, killed in Rome, killed for thinking freely. On April 20th, 1884, Pope Leo XIII published the encyclical Humanum Genus, a condemnation of Freemasonry. The Freemasons responded by funding a monument to Bruno. Ettore Ferrari sculpted it. He was a prominent Freemason who later became Grand Master of the Grand Orient of Italy. The statue went up in Campo de' Fiori, the exact site of Bruno's execution. It was unveiled on June 9, 1889, with roughly 100 Masonic banners flying in the square. Giovanni Bovio, a radical politician, gave the dedicatory speech. The Vatican closed its museums in protest and warned local parishes. Bruno stands in his Dominican habit, hooded, holding a book. He stares toward the Vatican. Around the base, relief panels depict scenes from his life and trial.
Irony runs deep here. Bruno spent his adult life fleeing the Dominican order. The Freemasons memorialized him in the robes he ran from. They made him a symbol of secular reason, but his philosophy was saturated with Hermetic magic and cosmic animism. He would have found Enlightenment rationalism as confining as Catholic orthodoxy. He did not believe in a dead mechanical universe any more than the Church did. He just disagreed about what made it alive. Modern astronomy has confirmed that stars are distant suns. Telescopes have found thousands of exoplanets. The observable universe stretches 93 billion light-years across, and cosmologists suspect it extends far beyond what we can see. Bruno's infinite universe, arrived at through Hermetic reasoning about divine generosity, looks less like a lucky guess with every passing decade. His memory system remains studied. The art of memory never disappeared entirely, and Bruno's version, with its combinatoric wheels and layered imagery, anticipated computational thinking in ways that researchers like Mary Carruthers and Lena Balzoni have explored. The system does not work the way Bruno thought it worked. It does not reproduce the cosmos inside the mind, but it does something, and what it does is interesting enough to keep attracting serious attention 4 centuries later. Frances Yates died in 1981. Her thesis that Bruno belongs to the Hermetic magical tradition rather than the scientific one remains debated. Some historians, particularly those in the history of science, think she overstated the magical dimension and underestimated Bruno's rational contributions. Others think she got it right, that Bruno was operating inside a magical worldview that happened to produce correct cosmological conclusions, and that flattening him into a proto-scientist is a form of intellectual dishonesty. The question the two sides are arguing about is whether a correct conclusion reached by the wrong method counts as knowledge. Science says no. Philosophy is less sure. Bruno would have rejected the distinction entirely. For him, the Hermetic method was not wrong. It was the only method that could reach the infinite, because infinity cannot be measured or observed. It can only be apprehended by a mind that has made itself infinite through the art of memory. The iron spike is still in his tongue. The fire has been burning for 426 years. Every time someone claims him for their side, rationalist or mystic, scientist or martyr, they are pulling his ashes from the Tiber and shaping them into a figure he would not recognize. He built a universe inside his mind. He could not take it apart. That is what they burned. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and check the link in the description for the full article with sources and images. Until next time.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to visit crazyalchemist.com for more intriguing content and follow Crazy Alchemist on Instagram and Facebook to stay connected.